What's up, y'all? It's Joelle. Welcome back to another video about college, because I think it will be helpful in those of you deciding whether or not you should take a gap year. Since I took a gap year during my time in college, and with classes not being able to meet in person, people are curious about the pros and cons of taking a gap year in the middle of your college experience or right at the start. I'm going to be detailing my experience, what I did step by step, as well as answering some of the questions that you guys submitted through Instagram. So thank you so much to anyone who asked a question. So to start out with the context, my process that I took in deciding to take my gap year. I took a gap year during my junior year of college, meaning that I did my freshman, sophomore year as normal, took my entire junior year off, was on campus for my senior year, and then had an additional term to finish out my classes after. I decided to take my gap year my freshman spring, so very early on. I did not even consider taking a gap year before I started college. It was the best possible timing for me personally to take a gap year. My school is a little different. We're on a quarter system, and it's very, very common for people to take quarters on, quarters off, randomly throughout their time in college. Your school may differ, so it's always important to know what your school's policies are. But for me, once I decided that I was going to take a gap year, I came back my freshman spring quarter and went immediately to my dean saying, hey, I'm thinking of applying to this program. What would that look like? And she kind of worked out a few steps. I applied for my program my sophomore winter to do the program the entirety of my junior year. It was a school year, going to a ministry school, which is probably a little different from what some of you guys had in mind for your gap years, but that's what I did. So then I had my gap year program all figured out. Meanwhile, every term I would meet with my dean, just say like, hey, just checking in, I'm probably gonna do this, so let me know if there's anything that I need to get in order. The steps that I needed to take were to organize my D plan, to basically telling the school which terms are gonna be on and off. There are certain requirements for how many terms you have on versus off, and then plan out in advance all the classes I was going to take to ensure that I would be able to finish my major and minor and distributive requirements during those times. Obviously, not every department knew which classes they were gonna be offering yet, so I kind of had to like fudge some of it, but I did have to communicate with each department I was getting a degree in and say, hey, do you have a projected plan for what classes you'll be offering which terms, so I can propose to the registrar, to the school admin, what classes I plan on taking, so that I can say, hey, even if I take my entire junior year off, I will be able to take all these classes when I get back to make sure that I finish all of my requirements. It was very, very stressful because there were definitely times where they're like, ooh, yeah, like we don't know if that's gonna work out. Praise the Lord, it did. So when I had that sheet, they're like, great, go petition this to the school admin and they should be able to sign off on it. And that was it. Actually, I really just had to bring a slip of paper to the administrative building. They signed off on it. It was pretty simple, and after my last class for sophomore summer, I just left and I didn't come back. During that year, I was in a program. I wasn't just like moping around doing nothing. I was in a school of ministry in Northern California. It was great. And it also taught me a lot of like leadership skills that I knew were going to be helpful for me in the long term. And ministry school is a whole different discussion, but it was very, very helpful for me personally. And then upon coming back, I really just showed up back on campus my senior fall to take classes. And it was basically as if I had never left. I didn't have to do anything to communicate with the school. I had been on top of my email, so I knew that I was staying on top of class enrollment so that I was getting all the courses that I needed. I knew I was on top of my housing, getting my housing secured, and all of that good stuff. So it just takes a little bit of admin work, checking your email and being on time to make sure that your integration back into school, campus life is very smooth. So after I was taking classes for the entirety of my senior year, I took that summer following my senior year off and then was back on campus for that fall. So the way that Dartmouth works is that most juniors are only on for 2 terms. They normally go do an internship or something during the winter, so they're taking classes during fall and spring, which meant that I, as a junior during my gap year, missed 2 terms of courses. To make up for that, I did a bunch of terms with 4 courses. Normally Dartmouth students take 3. I took additional courses during my senior year and then only had 1 additional quarter of coursework to make up. I wanted to intern during my summer, so that's why I chose to come back in the fall, and I was able to graduate that November of 2019. Another important thing to note is that because I was graduating within 2 terms of my expected graduation date for most people of the class of 2019, I was able to walk at graduation with my class, which was really important for me personally to be able to do that graduation ceremony with my class. And that is also a school by school decision, so I don't know every school's policy on when you can walk. I mean, who knows if graduations will even be happening anytime soon, but it's something to keep in mind. So that is my whole process, and there's some important points that I want to emphasize, and hopefully these will address some of your guys' questions. The first important thing to note is deciding whether a gap year is the right move for you, and if so, like, what would you even possibly do with all that time? The piece of advice I would give is that you should not go on a gap year if you do not have a plan of something that you plan to accomplish or a program you plan to do by the end of that gap year. It doesn't have to be an academic or career related goal. For me, obviously ministry school is not really gonna help me get a job necessarily, but it was something that I really valued personally and that I thought was really good for my life as a whole. Additionally, I think gap years are a really great time to develop like personal maturity and sense of identity. Total sidebar, but something to consider as well. The next topic is graduating late. How do you come to terms with graduating late just personally? Additionally, is it harder to get jobs when you graduate on a weird timeline? On a personal level, this is something that I struggled with a lot. Just feeling the need to maintain that same life cycle as a lot of my friends felt very stressful. And there's something so ingrained in us that prevents us from wanting to feel like we're falling behind. Honestly though, after a lot of just thought, prayer, meditation, I was able to come to terms with the fact that my graduation date really doesn't define me. It is not putting me behind in life. If anything, this is allowing me to pursue the things that I actually genuinely want to pursue, and it's allowing me to mature in ways that my college campus did not allow me to. And I would not trade that for anything. In terms of getting hired, I know it might look weird to have a gap in your resume, like what were you doing during that time? That's why, back to point one, it's so important to have a plan of what you want to accomplish. I think a lot of employers will be very understanding of why people are taking gap years during this time, but they want to see that you're using it well. But however, the next point of getting a job when you're graduating on a weird timeline, that depends on your industry. So for some industries, such as finance and banking or tech, there are timelines and cycles of new classes that are hired, and you have to stay on top of those timelines. They want people to start at the same time every single year. Their new grads all come in one wave. They may be making accommodations for that. Obviously, I think a lot of places are not hiring right now, so maybe postponing that would be a good idea. That's just something to keep in mind. However, for people in other industries that are maybe more gig-based, that are maybe just a little bit more normal of having a hiring cycle of applying, you know, a month or so before you start the job rather than a year, it doesn't make as much of a difference. In fact, for me, it kind of put me at a little bit of an advantage, just a little bit, because I was not applying at the same time as a lot of other students. I was applying to jobs for a winter start date in the fall rather than for a fall start date in the summer. You kind of have to know for yourself what type of work you want to go into and whether a gap year would put you at a substantial disadvantage or not. The next question surrounds maintaining friendships and a sense of community while you're away. In terms of how I was able to maintain friendships while I was on my gap year, really boils down to intentionality. I think it was also really heartwarming to have amazing friends that at the time that I was leaving school, like, were very open in expressing how much they were gonna miss me. Because I think one of those big dumb insecurities a lot of us feel when we're leaving a place for a long time is, will anyone even notice if I'm gone? Once I leave, will they just fill that gap with other people? And no, I found that I wasn't just filling a spot in my friends' lives. We really genuinely missed each other, and it was really, really awesome to be able to take time away but also maintain those friendships from a distance. A lot of FaceTimes, a lot of texting, a lot of Snapchat. I guess Snapchat was still heavily used then. I also was lucky enough to visit Dartmouth twice during my gap year. Obviously, huge privilege to be able to fly across the country and see your friends and reconnect with people, but it meant a lot. There are definitely times where I felt like I was missing out on school life and like I had no idea what was going on, but the distance was actually also really healthy for me socially, because at the time that I was leaving, I definitely was feeling a lot of like weird social pressures and anxieties that were not aligned with my personal values. So to leave and to be in an environment that was really, really healthy, like spiritually, emotionally, it gave me a really healthy perspective on school life and my relationship to it. And I was able to much more objectively evaluate how much I cared about the drama that was happening back on campus. I was so glad to be gone during rush. Oh my gosh, that was a miracle in itself. Following that line of social interaction, what was it like to come back to campus and have to reintegrate into things? In my gap year situation, it was actually very weird to come back to Dartmouth because I was in literally the most polar opposite environment I could think of, Christian ministry school, coming back to like Animal House Dartmouth. So that integration I think was the weirdest part, which most people probably won't deal with when doing a gap year. On the other hand, integrating back into friend groups, it was almost like I never left. It's weird, college just persists. Dartmouth, sure, there had been little changes, the layout of the dining hall changed, but my friends and the communities I was in were really the same. The one big thing I will say that was very tough for me to come to terms with was the fact that upon leaving, it made me ineligible for a lot of leadership positions in groups that I really cared about and that I aspired to be in leadership for since my freshman year. There was a time where I had really wanted to be a leader of my dance group. There was a time where I really wanted to be on the executive board of my sorority, and because I was gone my junior year, I was ineligible. And that for some people may seem like a big hit to your resume. For me though, it taught me to reorganize my priorities. Why did I want these leadership titles? If they're just titles, what is like the change behind each title that I actually am aspiring to see done? And then it also really empowered me to say, I may not be the president of this club, I may not be on the board or whatever, but I as a member still have the ability to make changes, and I still had people's respect in a way that kind of transcended the typical hierarchy of these different groups. It kind of felt like this burden was lifted off me of feeling obligated to have accumulated all these titles by your senior year, which I think people really easily feel when they're freshmen. And also in terms of social reintegration, I have to say, like, having clubs and groups that you're a part of regularly was a huge part of helping me feel reintegrated back into my community. The last main point of gap years that I got questions about was feeling old. Hashtag old, as someone said in the question. Once your friends leave, meaning once the class that you came in with, they graduate. This was a definite fear of mine. I was like, who am I gonna hang out with? What am I gonna do with my time? And the beginning of that fall term after graduation was kind of hard. Like, I kind of come in with the mindset of being, I'm gonna keep my head down, I'm just gonna do my work, do things I'm interested in, and I'm not really here to make friends. Not the most positive mindset to come into. However, I was so pleasantly surprised by the number of new friends I was able to make that last fall. I had had some close friends already, and those relationships absolutely were able to go deeper. But although I was blown away by the number of new people that I had never met, and we instantly clicked. Since I wasn't tied down to feeling obligated to hang out with certain people, to feel obligated to like have my last hurrah with my grades since I'd already done that, I dove into all these different topics that I had never really taken the time to explore at Dartmouth. I got a lot more involved in theater, a lot more involved in film, and a lot more involved in the digital arts community. And those are some of the places that I made some of my closest friends. So really I found that not having my class there allowed me to shift my priorities from spending time with people that I really cared about to like spending time doing things that I really cared about, and finding people along the way was very natural. It was very liberating, and also gave me a great perspective on how I wanted to use that time, because I was watching my friends enter into the real world, start jobs and all that good stuff, and I felt like seeing their transition allowed me to better use my time at Dartmouth and really cherish it. So by the time that I did actually graduate, I felt so ready to let go of Dartmouth, to let go of my college years, and I felt like I could really get excited about entering full-time work in the adult world. Additionally, I will say a lot of you are asking the same question, which tells us what? A lot of you will be taking gap years, and many of your friends may actually be on the same schedule as you by graduating late. Last question. Thank you, Sophie. How do you milk Dartmouth's money, trying to make their pockets hurt? Because mine sure do. This is a very common sentiment, especially right now, and this is not explicitly gap year related, but it does relate somewhat. Biggest things to know about entering college and trying to get the most of your money: there are going to be little mini grants sprinkled around the school, allocated for students to do student-run projects, internships, the like. Make sure that you're reading your email to stay aware of when those applications for those little grants are due, and if there's something that pertains to your work, a personal project that you want to do, an independent study, make sure you apply for those little pockets of free money to do what you want to do. Especially if you're in the arts or research, make sure you get that research experience, make sure you get that production equipment that you won't have access to outside of college, and just beef up your resume and your reels as much as you possibly can with all that expensive equipment that they have. Additionally, given my gap year plan, I was able to pay for one less quarter of tuition because I took more 4-course terms and squished all of my classes into 4 quarters instead of 5. I just talked for like half an hour. I hope this answered all of your guys' questions. Sorry, this is a very long video, but please share it with anyone who you think it might be relevant to. And if you have more questions, please leave them in the comments down below, and I'll try to answer them in the comments. Ooh, that was low talking. Thank you guys so much for watching. Love you, Jesus loves you, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace.